Dr. Kelthara's chromatophores flashed in rapid sequence, the Zephyrian equivalent of hyperventilation, as she stared at the data streaming across her bioscanner. The readings had to be wrong. They simply had to be. "Specimen appears to be experiencing severe cellular damage," she announced to her research team, her voice trembling through the lab's translation matrix. "Toxin levels are impossible. This should have terminated vital functions 17 standard minutes ago." The human subject, designated as Daniel Chen in their files, sat casually on the observation platform, seemingly unaware that he was, by all scientific understanding, supposed to be dead. He was actually laughing a behavior that their xenopsychologist Dr. Morthek had identified as indicating pleasure or amusement. "Perhaps we should administer the emergency antidote," suggested research assistant Quickstall, his nervous tentacles coiling around his datapad. Dr. Kelthara's third eye focused on the human, while her other two remained fixed on the readings. He consumed 3 full units of ethyl alcohol in liquid suspension. In any rational universe, that concentration should have shut down his central nervous system. The nightmare had begun 6 hours earlier, when the Galactic Research Consortium had received permission to conduct harmless observational studies on human physiology. Earth's humans had been remarkably cooperative, with Chen volunteering for what they assured him were basic biological assessments. "Standard procedure," Dr. Kelthara had explained to her team. "We observe natural behavior, document basic metabolic processes, maybe test reaction times. Simple, safe, educational." The first shock had come when Chen had requested something called coffee before beginning the tests. Their chemical analysis had immediately triggered containment protocols. Dr. Kelthara, Science Officer Zeknar, had announced, his voice high with panic, "The human is requesting access to a Class 7 neurotoxin. Caffeine concentrations in this coffee could kill a Rigelian in minutes." Chen had seemed genuinely confused when they'd tried to prevent him from consuming the poisonous liquid. "I haven't had my morning coffee yet," he'd said, as if this explained anything. "I'm barely functional without it." Barely functional? The substance should have rendered him completely non-functional. Permanently. But Chen had consumed the coffee, multiple cups of it, and instead of collapsing into neurological shutdown, he'd become more alert, more energetic. When Dr. Kelthara had asked about side effects, he'd simply said, "I feel human again." The horror had escalated during lunch break. "He's consuming capsaicin." Dr. Morthek had shrieked, his species' distress pheromones filling the lab. Voluntary ingestion of chemical irritants. This is self-harm behavior. Chen was eating something he called TI food, which their sensors indicated contained enough capsaicin to be classified as a chemical weapon by 17 different galactic conventions. Not only was he consuming it willingly, he was expressing disappointment that it wasn't spicy enough. Perhaps Dr. Kelthara had suggested desperately, "Humans have naturally occurring immunities to these toxins?" Her theory had been demolished when Chen had begun perspiring, apparently a normal physiological response to the chemical assault he was inflicting upon himself. He'd requested water to cool down, then complained that the relief was only temporary. "Sir," Dr. Kelthara had said through an emergency communication to Admiral Thexkai, "we may need to classify humans as a biohazard. They're consuming industrial solvents and chemical weapons as recreational nourishment." The Admiral's response had been typically blunt. "Are they hostile?" "No, sir. They're friendly." Disturbingly so. "Mr. Chen keeps asking if we'd like to try his food. He seems concerned about our nutrition." But the real crisis had begun when Chen had suggested they grab some drinks after the formal testing concluded. The establishment Chen led them to was called a bar, and their environmental suit sensors immediately began screaming warnings. The atmosphere was saturated with ethyl alcohol vapors at concentrations that should have been lethal to most oxygen-breathing species. "This is a social gathering place," Chen had explained cheerfully, apparently oblivious to the fact that he was standing in what amounted to a chemical weapons facility, very popular with my species. Dr. Kelthara had watched in mounting horror as dozens of humans voluntarily consumed various concentrations of what could only be classified as industrial poison. Some were consuming substances that burned when ignited. Chen had demonstrated this with something called absinthe, which produced a blue flame. "They're setting their consumables on fire," she'd reported back to headquarters, "then drinking them anyway." "The specimen is ordering something called a Long Island iced tea," Dr. Morthek had whispered, his scanner readings climbing toward critical levels. Chemical analysis indicates it contains 5 different types of ethanol-based toxins. Chen had consumed the poison cocktail in approximately 6 minutes, then ordered another. That's when Dr. Kelthara had made the decision to begin emergency monitoring. If they were going to witness the death of a sentient being through voluntary toxic consumption, they needed to document it for science. But Chen hadn't died. Instead, he'd become more sociable, engaging the research team in something he called conversation. His motor functions had become impaired, his speech patterns altered, and his decision-making processes clearly compromised all symptoms of severe neurological damage. Yet he remained conscious and apparently enjoying himself. "Dr. Kelthara," he'd said, his words slightly slurred, "you guys are really cool." Like, really cool. Are all aliens this nice? We should be friends. Galactic friends. Other humans in the establishment had confirmed that this was normal behavior for their species during recreational poisoning. They'd explained that humans had been voluntarily consuming ethyl alcohol for thousands of years, apparently for entertainment purposes. "Some humans consume alcohol daily," one local had informed them. "My grandfather drinks whiskey every evening, and he's 92 years old." Dr. Kelthara had nearly fainted. This grandfather figure had been voluntarily poisoning himself for decades and had somehow survived to an advanced age. The evening had concluded with Chen successfully navigating back to his residence, despite having consumed enough toxins to kill a small research station. He'd invited them to do this again sometime, apparently eager to repeat the suicidal behavior. Now, reviewing the data in her lab, Dr. Kelthara faced an uncomfortable conclusion. Humans weren't just surviving on a death world, they were actively making it more dangerous for entertainment. Dr. Kelthara, Assistant Quickstall, interrupted her thoughts. "Incoming message from Earth. Mr. Chen wants to know if we'd like to try something called hot wings next week." Dr. Kelthara's chromatophores flashed in what could only be described as existential terror. "Send a response. Tell him we'll consider it." She made a note in the official report, recommend immediate reclassification of humans from curious primitives to cosmic horror species. They don't just survive poison, they've weaponized it for social bonding.